Hey everyone, welcome back to the Peak Performance Table Tennis Podcast. In today's episode, we'll kick off a 5-part series about nutrition and how to optimize it for table tennis. To frame this discussion, we'll be using the Muscle and Strength Pyramid developed by Dr. Eric Helms. I like this framework because it provides a nutritional hierarchy, allowing you to prioritize the most impactful parts of your diet while ignoring the trivial. In today's discussion, we'll zero in on the bottom of the pyramid and focus on energy balance. In this hierarchical model, the categories on the bottom have the most significant impact on your results, whereas the items at the top are of decreasing importance. So, as the foundational level of the pyramid, energy balance is the most important variable that will impact your ability to maintain performance, recover from training, build muscle, and lose fat. In line with the Pareto principle, it is the 20% that will produce 80% of your results. Today, we'll talk about concepts like relative strength, ideal body fat percentages, how to determine maintenance calories through a 2-week tracking experiment, and specific numbers on how fast or slow you should lose weight in order to get the best results. In short, this episode is primarily about your weight and how to control it. Enjoy.
All right, let's dive into something that I think a lot of us struggle with. It's one thing to, practice our serves and work on our footwork in table tennis, but it's another thing entirely to make sure that our bodies are truly ready to perform at their best.
Absolutely. And it's so easy to get caught up in the excitement of the game, but often we overlook the most fundamental element, fueling our bodies properly for peak performance.
That's exactly what we're tackling in this deep dive, energy balance. We're going to break it down, cut through the noise of all those fad diets, and give you a clear, science-backed understanding of how to optimize your nutrition for top-notch table tennis.
I'm excited to dig into this.
Me too. And to guide us on this journey, we're turning to Peak Performance Table Tennis by Kevin Finn. Now, Kevin starts off with a fascinating anecdote about the legendary Jan-Ove Waldner that really caught my eye. It seems that during the 1987 World Championships, Waldner got hit with, a bit of a stomach bug.
Oh no, not ideal timing for a major tournament.
No, not at all. Apparently, he ended up losing a significant amount of weight, something like 15 pounds, due to the illness.
Wow, 15 pounds. That's a lot, especially for an athlete in the middle of competition.
Right. And while I'm certainly not advocating for unhealthy or unintentional weight loss, his coaches noticed something pretty remarkable about Waldner's game after he recovered.
Really? What kind of changes did they observe?
Well, it was like he'd been suddenly imbued with this newfound agility and speed around the court. His footwork was lighter, he was moving effortlessly, and his transitions between strokes were noticeably smoother.
Interesting. So this unintentional weight loss, though definitely not ideal, actually seemed to have a positive impact on his game.
Exactly. And it all boils down to this concept called relative strength.
Okay, relative strength. I've heard that term thrown around, but break it down for me. What exactly does it mean?
So in the simplest terms, relative strength is basically the ratio of your strength to your body weight.
I see. So it's not just about how strong you are overall, but how strong you are relative to how much you weigh.
Exactly. And in a sport like table tennis, where speed, agility, finesse, all of that is so crucial, having a higher relative strength can make all the difference in the world.
That makes a lot of sense. Less weight to move around means you can react quicker, sprint to the net faster, transition between strokes more efficiently.
Precisely. It's like having a lighter, more agile body that can keep up with the demands of this incredibly fast-paced sport. Now, this is to say that all table tennis players need to be as thin as possible.
Right, because going too low in body weight could have negative consequences, especially when it comes to things like muscle mass and overall energy levels.
Exactly. It's all about finding that sweet spot, that optimal fighting weight that's going to give you a competitive edge without compromising your health.
So how does a table tennis player go about figuring out their ideal fighting weight? Where do they even begin?
Well, Kevin Finn suggests starting with something called body mass index, or BMI. This is a pretty common measurement. But for athletes, it's important to remember that BMI doesn't tell the whole story.
Right, because it doesn't distinguish between muscle mass and fat mass. A very muscular athlete could have a high BMI and still be incredibly lean and fit.
Exactly. So while BMI can be a decent starting point for the general population, for serious athletes, like many of our listeners, body fat percentage, or BFP, is a much more accurate measure.
That makes sense. BFP gives you a clearer picture of your body composition, which is really what we're interested in optimizing for athletic performance.
And speaking of optimizing body composition, Finn provides this handy chart in his book that outlines healthy body fat percentage ranges for men and women. He suggests that for peak table tennis performance, men should aim for around 8 to 15% body fat, and women about 16 to 22%.
Okay, those are helpful benchmarks, but those are just ranges, right? Do other individual factors come into play when determining the ideal body fat percentage for peak performance?
Oh, absolutely. These ranges are guidelines, not hard and fast rules. What works for one athlete might not work for another. We're all unique, and it's about finding what works best for you, your body type, your training regimen, your age, and of course, your overall health.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about personalized optimization, not chasing some arbitrary number. But while we're on the topic of finding that sweet spot, it's crucial to acknowledge that there are potential risks associated with athletes who are extremely focused on weight loss, particularly something called low energy availability, or LEA.
LEA. That sounds a little concerning. Can you tell us a bit more about what LEA is and why it's something that athletes should be mindful of?
Sure. So in essence, LEA occurs when you're just not consuming enough calories to support both your intense physical activity and the basic functions of your body. Imagine trying to run a car on fumes. Eventually, it's going to sputter and break down.
Ouch. Yeah, not a pretty picture.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing LEA can manifest itself in some pretty unpleasant ways for athletes.
You got it. We're talking decreased performance, obviously, but also impaired recovery from training, difficulty building muscle, and even potentially serious long-term health issues if it's not addressed. And it's especially important for female athletes to be mindful of LEA because it can disrupt their menstrual cycle and have a negative impact on bone health.
That's really important information. So it's not just about achieving a certain weight or body fat percentage. It's about finding a sustainable balance that allows you to pursue your athletic goals without compromising your overall well-being.
Exactly. It's about being strong, healthy, and energized, both on and off the court.
So we've talked about finding that ideal fighting weight and steering clear of the pitfalls of LEA. Now let's dive into the heart of it all. Energy balance. This is where the rubber meets the road, right? Seems like a pretty straightforward concept like calories in, calories out, but I have a feeling it's a bit more nuanced than that.
You're absolutely right. There's more to it than meets the eye. I mean, sure, the basic principle is simple enough. If you consume the same number of calories that you burn, you'll maintain your weight. Eat less than you burn, you lose weight. Eat more, and, well, you gain weight. Sounds easy peasy, right?
Yeah, in a perfect world, right?
Exactly, but our bodies, they're a bit more complex than that. They like to keep things interesting.
So what makes energy balance so tricky in practice? What are some of those curveballs our bodies like to throw at us?
Well, Kevin Finn highlights a few key challenges in the book. First off, let's face it, we humans, we're not always the best at estimating our calorie intake. Research suggests that people can underestimate their calorie consumption by a significant margin, sometimes as much as 50%, if you can believe it.
50%? Whoa, that's a huge difference. So wait, you're saying we might think we're being all virtuous with our food choices? But in reality, we could be consuming way more calories than we realize. Talk about a reality check.
Exactly. And it's not just about underestimating our food intake either. We also tend to overestimate the number of calories we burn through exercise.
Oh, really? So that hour-long table tennis session doesn't quite cancel out that extra slice of pizza?
Unfortunately not. Don't get me wrong. Exercise is amazing. It's crucial for our health, fitness, and body composition. But it's not a free pass to eat whatever we want, sadly.
So finding that balance between what we're taking in and what we're burning is really key. Easier said than done, right?
You said it. And then there's this other factor that comes into play, something called non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEAT for short.
All those little movements we make throughout the day that burn calories without us even really realizing it, right?
Fidgeting, walking around, taking the stairs instead of the elevator. All of these seemingly small activities contribute to NEAT, and they can vary significantly from person to person.
So someone who's naturally more restless or just has a more active lifestyle might have a bit of an advantage when it comes to calorie burning, even if their structured exercise routine is pretty similar to someone who's more sedentary.
It certainly seems that way. And the tricky thing about NEAT is that it's largely subconscious. We don't have as much conscious control over it as we do with structured exercise. We can decide to hit the gym for an hour, but we can't exactly force ourselves to fidget more throughout the day, can we?
That's a good point. It's those unconscious habits and tendencies that can make a big difference in the long run. Okay, so we've got these three big challenges: underestimating calorie intake, overestimating calories burned through exercise, and the wild card of NEAT. It feels a bit like we're trying to solve a puzzle with some missing pieces here. So where do we even start? How do we begin to make sense of all this?
Don't worry, it's not an impossible puzzle to solve. The first step is awareness. Once we understand these potential pitfalls, we can start putting strategies in place to navigate them effectively.
Okay, that makes sense. Awareness is key. So what's the first move? What's the most important piece of the puzzle we need to figure out?
The key is to determine our starting point, our baseline, what's known as our maintenance calories. This is the number of calories we need to consume each day to maintain our current weight.
So it's like finding our ground zero before we start making any adjustments. How do we go about figuring out that magic number, our own personal maintenance calorie level?
Well, there are a couple of ways to approach this. Online calculators can give you a general estimate. They'll take into account things like your age, gender, height, weight, and activity level.
Those online calculators can be helpful, but I imagine they're not perfect, are they?
You're right, they're based on averages, and as we all know, everyone's metabolism is different. So while they can be a good starting point, a more accurate method is to conduct what's called a 2-week self-monitoring experiment.
A 2-week experiment. Interesting. I like the sound of that. Tell me more. What does this experiment involve?
It's all about meticulous tracking. For 2 weeks, you're going to keep a close eye on both your body weight and your calorie intake. Consistency is key here. Weigh yourself daily under the same conditions, first thing in the morning, after using the restroom, and before you've had anything to eat or drink.
Consistency is key. Got it. Noted. And what about tracking calories? Are we talking about meticulously logging every single bite and sip?
Exactly. Keep a detailed food journal and record everything you consume throughout the day. Be as precise as possible with portion sizes. A food scale can be really helpful for this. We want accuracy here.
I can see how a food scale would come in handy. It's easy to underestimate those portion sizes when we're just eyeballing it. Okay, so we've diligently tracked our weight and calories for 2 weeks. What's next? What do we do with all this data?
Now comes the fun part. Well, maybe not fun for everyone, but we've got to analyze the numbers. Compare your average weight from week 1 to your average weight from week 2. If your weight has remained relatively stable, it suggests that your average daily calorie intake over those 2 weeks is pretty close to your maintenance level.
That makes sense. If our weight is stable, it means our calorie intake and expenditure are more or less balanced. But what happens if our weight has gone up or down during those 2 weeks? What do we do then?
That's when we bring out the calculator. We can use a simple formula to determine how far above or below our maintenance level we are based on that weight change. Let's say we've got a table tennis player named Sarah who's trying to figure out her calories. After 2 weeks of meticulous tracking, she finds that she's gained, say, half a pound.
Okay, so Sarah has gained a little weight, which suggests that she's been eating slightly above her maintenance level over those 2 weeks.
Precisely. To figure out how many calories above her maintenance she's been consuming, we need to do a little math. Don't worry, it's not rocket science.
Hit me with those numbers. I'm ready.
So we know that 1 pound of fat contains roughly 3,500 calories. Sarah gained half a pound, which is equivalent to 1,750 calories over those 2 weeks.
Got it. 1,750 calories over 2 weeks. Makes sense. So how do we break that down into her daily calorie surplus?
It's simple. We take the total calorie surplus, those 1,750 calories, and divide it by the number of days in 2 weeks, which is 14.
Okay, so 1,750 calories divided by 14 days, that's about 125 calories per day. So Sarah's average daily calorie intake over those 2 weeks was roughly 125 calories higher than her maintenance level.
You nailed it. And to get a clearer picture of her maintenance calories, she would then subtract that 125 calorie surplus from her average daily calorie intake over those 2 weeks.
This is making so much more sense now. So if she'd lost weight during those 2 weeks, we'd do the opposite, right? We'd add that calorie deficit to her average daily intake to figure out her maintenance level.
Exactly. By doing this 2-week experiment, Sarah now has a much better understanding of her own personal maintenance calories, that sweet spot where her calorie intake and expenditure are more or less in balance.
If all this seems a little overwhelming, I recommend giving my preferred nutrition tracking app, MacroFactor, a try. It's the app I use, and I recommend it to all my clients. It's the fastest, most accurate food logger on the market, with verified food data and smart coaching algorithms that adapt to your goals. Whether you're looking to lean out, bulk up, or just stay in peak shape, this app has you covered. You can get a 2-week free trial with my code KevinF and start tracking your progress with confidence. Head over to macrofactorapp.com to download the app and take your nutrition to the next level.
This is such valuable information. It feels like we've unlocked a key piece of the puzzle, that baseline understanding of our own bodies. But we're not done yet, are we? We still need to talk strategy. How do we use this newfound knowledge, these maintenance calories, to actually achieve our weight goals, whether it's shedding a few pounds for agility or adding some muscle for power?
You're right. It's not just about understanding those numbers. It's about knowing how to work with them. It's like now that we've got the blueprint, we can start making some strategic adjustments to really dial in your nutrition for peak performance.
Okay, so let's talk strategy. Let's say someone wants to slim down a bit, improve their agility on the court. What's a healthy and effective calorie deficit to aim for? I'm ready to make those adjustments and start seeing those results.
Well, hold your horses. Remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? Finn recommends a moderate approach, a calorie deficit of about 10 to 25% below your maintenance level. That's a good sweet spot to aim for.
Okay, so no crash diets, no extreme calorie restrictions. Got it.
Exactly. We want to be smart about this. Finn emphasizes losing no more than 0.5% to 1% of your total body weight per week. That usually translates to about 1 to 2 pounds of weight loss per week for most people.
So it's all about making those gradual, sustainable changes. But our bodies can be a bit stubborn sometimes, right? What about those dreaded weight loss plateaus? You know, when you're doing everything right, but the scale just won't budge. How do we outsmart our own bodies and keep those results coming?
Those plateaus, don't you just love them? Remember we were saying earlier about how our bodies are masters of adaptation? Well, they'd much rather stay in their comfort zones, even when we're trying to shake things up a bit. So yeah, plateaus are definitely a thing.
So how do we break through those plateaus? What's the secret?
It's all about paying attention to the signals your body is sending you. If you've hit a plateau and you're stuck there for, say, 2 weeks in a row or 4 weeks for women, just to account for those hormonal fluctuations, it might be time to make a few tweaks to your approach.
Tweaks? Like what? Give me an example.
Well, you could try slightly decreasing your calorie intake again, just a tad, or maybe bump up your activity levels a bit. It's about finding that sweet spot where you're challenging your body just enough to keep things moving in the right direction without overdoing it.
It's a delicate dance, isn't it? Between pushing ourselves and listening to our bodies.
It really is. Now, on the flip side, let's say someone wants to bulk up, add some muscle mass. We're basically talking about the same principles, just in reverse, right?
Okay, so instead of a calorie deficit, we're talking about a calorie surplus. Eating more calories than we burn to fuel those muscle gains.
Bingo. Finn suggests starting with a calorie surplus of about 10% above your maintenance. But remember, the ideal rate of weight gain, it's going to vary from person to person. It depends on your training experience, your individual goals, all of that. If you're a beginner, someone with little to no resistance training experience, you might aim for a rate of about 1.5% to 2% of your body weight gained each month. More experienced lifters, those who've been at it for a while, they might shoot for a gain of around 0.5% to 1% per month. Again, it's all about maximizing those gains while minimizing unnecessary fat gain.
And just like with weight loss, consistency is key when it comes to weight gain, right?
Yeah.
We've got to keep track of our progress, make those adjustments as we go along.
Absolutely. Monitor your weight weekly, see how your clothes are fitting, and don't be afraid to tweak your calorie intake every few weeks, say every 2 to 4 weeks, depending on how your body is responding.
This has been super insightful, but I've got to confess, the idea of tracking every single calorie I consume, honestly, just feels a tad overwhelming.
Yeah.
Is there any hope for those of us who aren't ready to commit to full-on calorie counting?
Listen, you are not alone. Calorie counting, it's not for everyone. Finn suggests a few practical alternatives, especially if you prefer a less numbers-heavy approach.
Okay, now you're speaking my language. What are those alternatives?
One thing you can try is simply keeping a food journal, just jotting down what you eat throughout the day. You'd be surprised how powerful that can be. You don't even have to worry about counting calories. Just write it down.
So it's about bringing more awareness to our eating habits, even without the precise calculations.
Exactly. Just by paying attention to what you're consuming, you might naturally start making healthier choices without even realizing it. It's like that old saying, what gets measured gets managed, right?
Makes sense. Are there any other strategies we can try without having to pull out the calculator and food scale for every single meal?
Absolutely. Focus on those small, sustainable changes you can make to your diet. Incorporate more whole, unprocessed foods like fruits, vegetables, lean proteins. Prioritize fiber, be mindful of your portion sizes, and really try to tune into your body's hunger and fullness cues.
So it sounds like mindful eating is a big part of this, whether we're meticulously tracking calories or just trying to make healthier choices in general.
Absolutely. It's about understanding how our bodies work, how they utilize energy, and using that knowledge to make choices that support our athletic goals and our overall well-being.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive into energy balance, and I feel like we've covered a lot of ground. We started by talking about relative strength and how it's not just about how much we weigh, but the ratio of strength to body weight, especially important in a fast-paced sport like table tennis.
Right, and we talked about body fat percentage, how finding that sweet spot can make a big difference in our performance. And then we really got into the nitty-gritty of energy balance, those calories in, calories out, and how our bodies adapt to keep things in check.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Until next time, keep practicing, keep fueling your bodies wisely, and we'll see you on the court.
Hello there, it's me again. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'd love to have some feedback. So if you're listening on YouTube, please like and subscribe and drop a comment. And if you're on another platform, subscribe now for future episodes packed with actionable insights. In each episode, we'll be breaking down the key concepts from my book, making it easier for you to improve your game step by step. So don't miss out, subscribe today, and as always, may the spin be with you.